Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me this evening in this talk. I'm going to be presenting some results from a paper that I wrote recently. The title of the talk is not actually the title of the paper, but I thought that the talk title should convey exactly what I'm going to be talking about. So the lockdown that happened in India, in particularly in April, the first month when the pandemic broke out, was one of the most stringent in the world. Um, by 25th of March, the stringency index, as calculated by the University of Oxford, was at 100, which is the maximum. So all activities other than essential activities had been shut down. And obviously, that meant that there was a near complete shutdown of the economy. So the question that I was trying to investigate was how did this affect jobs? Because it's not, you might say, well, why is that of interest? Because if the economy shuts down, jobs are going to be lost, but that's not necessarily the case. People can continue to be employed, but just not working during the lockdown. And so this question was really about job losses, people who lost employment during the lockdown. And particularly, I was interested in finding out what the gendered nature of those job losses was. So that's what prompted this investigation. And what actually got me thinking were reading reports in newspapers and early estimates that were coming in from other researchers, is that globally women were more vulnerable to losing their jobs compared to men in this particular pandemic. By the way, this is not the common feature of the earlier recessions. So, for example, when you look at the job losses in the US in the recession of 2008, more men lost jobs than women. But in the pandemic induced slowdown or recession, um, more women globally were losing jobs than men, and more women were expected to lose jobs compared to men. So, one of the early estimates that came out from the Citibank said that out of the 44 million workers in vulnerable sectors globally, 31 million women were expected to face potential job cuts compared to 13 million men. So the job cuts were going to go after the workers in the vulnerable sectors. And within that, the more vulnerable workers. What are the vulnerable sectors? Sectors that employ people casually or on a daily wage or on a very informal contract. Those are the first to go. And within that, more women were expected to lose jobs than men. So I started to look at the data for India, and the data that I've used was data from Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMIE, to which I had access. And they have, sorry about this typo, this should be April 2020. Basically, they have data at the national level from January 2016 to April 2020. So it's a very long time series of data. And what they do, the way they collect their data is that they have a panel of individuals or households that who are surveyed 3 times per year. So the same individuals are surveyed and asked questions 3 times a year. And so roughly they have about 43,600 households per month. And the same households are surveyed 3 times a year. So each 4-month period is known as a wave. And so there are 3 such waves in the year. And then there are, their total sample is about over a lakh, a lakh 20,000 something for per wave. So it's a very large data set. So what was the big picture in terms of employment rates or unemployment rates? Because, if you find that, for example, in April 2020, unemployment went up drastically, you might say, well, maybe every year in April it goes up. Maybe there's something seasonal about jobs in April. And that's why you find that every year in April, unemployment rates go up. So first I plotted the rural employment rates and unemployment rates, starting from January of 2016, going all the way to April of 2020. So if you see the top 2 lines, which are the red line and the blue line, they are the urban employment rate and the rural employment rate. So the red line is the rural employment rate, the blue line is the urban employment rate. And you see that there are, of course, monthly fluctuations, but by and large, between January 2016 to March of 2020, there isn't a huge variation. There aren't huge ups and downs. But from March to April, there is a sudden drop in employment. And mirroring that, if you see the bottom two lines, which are the green line and the orange line, these are the unemployment rates. Mirroring this fall in employment, you have a huge increase in unemployment. Again, the reason to plot these two, you could say, well, why don't you just plot one, either the employment or unemployment? Why plot both? Because in India, open unemployment is not, historically has not been very high, right? So people have what is called disguised unemployment, or they enter and exit labor force several times, depending on whether there are jobs, there's work available or not. And so when you say open unemployment, it means that the worker is saying in their survey, I don't have a job, I'm willing to work, and I'm looking for work. But I don't have work right now. So that's what unemployment is. And so you see a sharp rise in unemployment and a sharp decline in employment, right? So that's the picture in the overall. So basically what this graph tells us is that what happened in April was not a seasonal trend, that April 2020 just happened to have a slightly larger dip, but of the kind that you had seen earlier in previous years as well. That's definitely not the case. So now, so it's clear that employment did drop in the first month of the lockdown, and unemployment did increase in the first month of the lockdown. So when we look at the gendered impact, and this is where the title of the talk comes in, which is that the lockdown was gender blind. It wasn't a different lockdown for men and a different lockdown for women. It was the same rules of lockdown. It was the same economic shutdown for all economic activities. And so if it was a gender blind policy, the question is, were the consequences of the policy gender neutral? Did it affect men and women in a similar fashion? Okay. Now, when we analyze this question for India, we have to remember that female labor force participation rates have been low historically in India. And in fact, they have been falling in over the last 2 decades. Now, what this fall means, whether it's a real fall, whether it's a question of measurement, whether it's a question of women withdrawing from the labor force, or whether it's a question of not enough jobs being available for them, that's a totally different issue for now. And I have written about it, I've worked on it, and I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A. But right now, we just need to remember that there are pre-existing gaps in male and female labor force participation rates already in India before the pandemic hit. Okay, and these gaps are large. I'm going to show you a graph just very soon. And so because these pre-existing gaps are large, what we find in India, that the absolute number of individuals who were employed before the pandemic and the absolute number of individuals who lost jobs in the first month of the lockdown, for both of these, there was a greater number of men than women. So more men had jobs before the pandemic, and more men lost jobs. Fewer women had jobs, and fewer women lost jobs. So if you look at it on the face of it, it might seem that, well, then in that case, the gendered impact was such that men were more hurt by the lockdown than women. But I would like to suggest that that's not right. That's not quite the right way to look at it. So one simple thing that one could do before you ran regressions or did any sophisticated exercise, you can do the following, which is take the average employment of the previous year. So look at the employment from March 2019 up to March 2020 for men, and take the same number for so these are absolute numbers of men and women employed in the previous year. So that takes care of entry and exit into the labor force, seasonal entry and exit. Take that as the denominator, and on the numerator, look at the employment in April 2020, just for 1 month. So you're taking the ratio of employment in April 2020 to the average employment of the previous year. Okay, and this is what this graph is showing. It's showing you the ratio of April 2020 employment to the average employment over the previous year. Okay, and this, and I've ranked it from high to low, and this tells you that relative to the previous year's employment, which groups had fewer jobs. So the lower this ratio is, it meant that relative to what their employment was in the previous year, fewer numbers were employed in April 2020. So what is the group that suffered the least in terms of unemployment, or had the highest employment even during lockdown? They are the rural upper castes. And what is the group that suffered the most during April 2020? It's rural female. Okay, you see the line here, which is all. So this is the average, and that's about 70%. So on average, employment in April 2020 was 70% of the previous year. Okay, and these are all the groups that had higher than average. So you see, for example, all men, you have a ratio that's higher than 70%, and all women are here, right here. So already this is telling you that women, proportionate to their employment in the previous year, lost out more, had lower levels of employment in April 2020. And you see the same result for caste as well. And I have another paper on the caste impacts. And again, in the Q&A, I can talk about that. But today, I'm mainly focusing on the gendered impacts. So this is just a very simple test to see whether there are indeed gendered impacts, or whether the gender blind policy produced gender neutral impacts. And the first answer is no, it did not. Okay. So having done this, I said, okay, now I have a case for investigating. And the advantage of the CMIE data is that you have data for the same set of individuals over time. So it's panel data, right? So I can actually look at the same set of individuals before the pandemic, before the lockdown, and the same set of individuals after the lockdown, which takes away any individual specific reasons why people might or might not be employed. Okay. Now, in the post-pandemic data point, there was just one single month, which was April 2020. This was the wave 19, which covered January to April 2020, but only 1 month of this wave was the month of the post-pandemic period. Now, pre-pandemic, the immediate pre-pandemic month was wave 18, which was September to December 2019. So basically in December 2019, the same individuals that were interviewed in April 2020 were previously interviewed in December 2019. So I started off actually constructing just a 2-period panel, December 2019 and April 2020, but then I expanded it and I say, okay, why don't I stretch it back a little bit to check what the entry and exit into labor force is, because people do enter and exit labor force, particularly women, right? So I didn't want to pick up something which was just a seasonal, factor in December. Or in April, of course, there was just 1 month, but I didn't want to pick up something that was seasonal in December. So I looked at four waves, right? So I have data for April 2019, for August 2019, December 2019, and April 2020. I can go back even further, but this actually makes the point pretty convincingly. So I'm not going to gain something extra by going back further for this particular investigation. And what does that look like now? So this is the picture that I want you to take a look at. So now these are the 4 waves: April 2019, August 2019, December 2019, and April 2020. And this is showing you, telling us the mean of employed. So what is the proportion, average proportion of employed people, unemployed people, and out of the labor force. So who are the out of the labor force individuals? Those who are not employed, and those who do not say that they are willing or looking for work actively. So we have to classify them as out of the labor force, even though technically they could be at another point in time, they could be in the labor force. But for these, for every data, every wave, we have to classify them as OLF, or out of the labor force. Now you see here, for example, in April 2019, this is the line for women and this is the line for men. Okay, the blue circle, blue dot, is the employment rate. The green is the unemployment. Sorry, the green is out of the labor force, and the red square is the unemployed. Now look at this is the ratio, proportion of women who are employed, and this is the ratio of proportion of men who are employed in April 2019. So you see this gender gap here in April 2019. Come to August, it's pretty much the same. So you see this round blue bar, dot versus this round blue dot. It's more or less at the same point, and similarly here. Come to December, there's a very slight shift, but not really. Again, same thing here. But then when you come to April 2020, you see a sudden drop in employment for men, and the same for women. Okay, so this is men here, and this is women. But if you look at the absolute drop, it's much higher for men than it is for women. Okay, so this is the point that I was making earlier, which is that absolute numbers of men employed were higher pre-pandemic. And in the first month, the absolute drop in employment for men was higher. The absolute number of women employed were lower in pre-pandemic. And the absolute decline, here, I don't know if you can see it, the blue dot sort of overlaps the red square a little bit. But if you see this, the absolute decline is less than for men. So average male employment, because you see that it doesn't really shift that much from month to month, was 67%. Average female employment was about 9%. And in April 2020, from 67, it goes down to about 46. And for women, from 9%, it goes down to about 5%, right? So this is the point that I was making earlier about, in the context of the pre-existing gaps, if you just compare the absolute numbers, you will see that more men have lost employment. But we need to remember those bars which showed us the ratio. So obviously there's something else we need to do in order to get at the gendered impact. So a simple regression that one can run is you can regress the probability of being employed on the month, on the gender, and the interaction of gender and month. Okay, and you can put individual fixed effects here. You can, that's a basic equation that I ran. You can run variations on the same equation. You can add lagged employment as a dependent variable, but then of course you lose one time period, because when you take the lag, there is no lag for the first time period. And then you put district fixed effects, because individual fixed effects don't mean much in that context. Here I'm using all the 4 periods. If I add lagged employment as a dependent variable, I use only 3 periods. You can even do it for 2 periods, which is just December 2019 and April 2020, again with district fixed effects. You can do another variation. You can say, well, even though the lockdown was similar and uniform across all parts of India in April 2020, you can look at the spread of the disease. So you can take the top 8 states in terms of COVID incidence, okay, and see whether over and above the lockdown induced fall, was there a greater effect because of the fact that the pandemic itself was very, was raging, and the disease incidence was higher. And so was there an over and above effect on employment due to the disease itself over and above the lockdown effect? So all of these are variations on the main equation that I've listed here. And each of these has an interaction between the gender and the month, right? And so you can see what the results are here. And I have the paper on the website, and I'm happy to share the PDF with anyone who's interested. But let me just show you some results graphically, right? Now, you see here that overall, men are more likely to be employed than women, just the coefficient of the male dummy. And for April 2019, August 2019, so here I've taken the base month as December 2019. Okay, so relative to December, so what this means is that relative to women, men are more likely to be employed just overall for the entire sample. What do the month dummies mean? That means relative to December, in April 2019 and August 2019, the employment was no different. It's bang on the zero line. But if April 2020, you see a sharp decline in employment relative to December. So that's just the overall effect. Okay. What does the interaction between the male dummy and the month dummy tell us? So April 2019 and male, no difference. August 2019 and male, no difference relative to December 2019. But April 2020, the interaction of April 2020 and male relative to December 2019, you see there's a huge drop. So this is just showing us the result in the previous graph that men lost about 19 or 20 percentage points in terms of employment. So that's really, it's sort of at 0.2 somewhere here. So that's what this thing here is showing. But if you add a dummy for previous lagged employment, right? So conditional on being employed in the previous period, what are the chances that you were employed in the next period, right? And so here you see conditional on being employed in the previous period, and you were male, you were much more likely to be employed in the overall in the sample. And that what happened to the, okay, that coefficient somehow didn't show up. So basically, relative to being employed, oh yeah, this is it. Sorry, what am I saying? Sorry about the confusion. Yeah, so relative to being employed in the previous period, men were more likely to be employed in the following period, which means women were less likely to be employed. Okay, and so what this is telling us is that relative to conditional on being employed in December 2019, women were less likely, so it's actually 20 percentage points less likely to be employed in April 2020. Okay, so the minute you introduce a dummy for previous period employment, you see that the gender effect starts to kick in. Okay, you see here, again, if you just, this is just similar to here. This is April 2020 into male, this is male into lockdown. So if you just didn't control for lagged employment, this is the effect that you see, which is correct also. But the minute you control for lagged employment, you see that men were more likely to retain employment than women, right? So this is the point that I'm making about the gendered impacts. And you also see that over and above the lockdown, individuals living in high COVID states were less, not a huge, it's significant, but not very big in terms of magnitude, were less likely to be employed in April 2020. So this is a sort of summary result of all the various specifications that I ran. And you can look at the paper again and look at the individual coefficients. And because it's a panel, because it's the same set of individuals, this is really picking up the effect of lockdown. And conditional on being employed, you are seeing that the effect is gender. Okay, this was just an additional thing which I did, which is what is the profile of people who lost jobs. So it turns out that the biggest job loss was in the broad category that's called manufacturing, construction, and processing. And we know that from our, just anecdotal evidence. Remember the pictures in April, migrants walking back to the cities because all of these jobs in the cities were just shut down, right? So that was the biggest. In services also, you see a decline, but the line does cross the zero, but in the point estimate does indicate that there was some job loss in services. But the biggest decline in April was in manufacturing, construction, and processing, which is a very large proportion of urban jobs. I divided the age profile into just broadly older, which means over 35, and less than 35. So overall, older people are more likely to be employed. But in April 2020, the same older people also lost jobs more relative to younger. Okay. And in terms of education levels, I looked at low levels and high levels. So just people below 12 years of education versus people more than 12 years of education. And again, I find here that those with who were less educated were more likely to lose jobs in April 2020. So there's just some other characteristics of individuals who lost jobs. Okay. Now, what is interesting about the CMIE data is that in addition to data on employment, from December 2019, they've introduced a new module, which is just hours spent on domestic work. Now, it's a very broad question, and it's not very nuanced. It just asks, how many hours did you spend on domestic work? And it doesn't break it down by category, so we don't know what people are thinking when they think of domestic work, but that's what the question is. And I looked at December 2019, April 2020, because these are literally just the two modules for two periods of time for which this data is available. And this is the distribution of men, for women, and this is the distribution for men. Now, first you see it, so it's in half hourly intervals, so 0 hours, 0.5 hours, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, and so on. That's how the thing goes. So these tiny things here refer to that distribution. And you see, in fact, that for women, you go all the way up to about 10 hours or so. You find the distribution for women is much more sort of not quite normal shape, but moving towards that. And it's certainly much greater proportion of women work more than 4 hours, let's say, compared to men. And this is the distribution in April. So the distribution really changes where the proportion of women doing any particular slot of hours has increased pretty much for all the slots here, right? Now, the interesting thing is that there is some change in the distribution for men as well. And proportion of men doing 0 hours also goes up, but the proportion of men doing between 0.5 and 4 hours actually did go up in April 2020 relative to December 2019. And when you run an average regression, actually, the gender gap in terms of hours spent on domestic work, just for that 1 month in April, declined by 1 hour. Okay. Now, whether this is just happened in April when domestic workers, our helpers were not coming and helping, whether it'll stick, whether people have changed their habits and realize that, it's okay to share housework. All of that we don't know. As soon as the next round of data comes, I'll analyze that. But it is an interesting fact that you see from the data. I'll just want to make just two broad points and then end. So the two dimensions that we saw of the impact of the lockdown, they're definitely not gender neutral. One in a negative direction, which is women are less likely to be employed, conditional being employed previously. The other result, too early to say, but sort of hopeful in terms of greater sharing of housework. If that sticks, that's really very nice. But there's yet another dimension which is gendered and which we need to keep in our minds when we analyze the impact of the lockdown, which is frontline health workers. Now, frontline health workers, by that I mean the ASHAs, the ANMs, the auxiliary nurses and midwives, and women working in the primary healthcare centers. Okay, these are Ashas and ANMs are exclusively female, and a large portion of those working in primary healthcare centers are female. So our frontline health workers who are actually doing government work and continue to retain their employment even through the lockdown. But these are workers who are female, poorly paid, at very high risk of getting infected. Now, over time, some PPE has been made available, but by and large, suffering from a shortage of protective equipment, socially ostracized, and have been targets of stigma and violence. And currently, in several states, ASHA workers are protesting. In some states, they are on strike, saying that we haven't been paid all this time, which is, you know, the meager pay that they're entitled to. Even that has not been paid. Right? So, on the one hand, we see job losses for women. On the other hand, these are women who didn't lose their jobs, and are doing absolutely fantastic and the most essential work in terms of contact tracing, in terms of administering the basic, the swab test for COVID, educating people about COVID. I also forgot to mention the Anganwadi workers, the ICDS workers, who are also exclusively female, who are in charge of vaccinations, in charge of micronutrient delivery, giving advice to pregnant mothers, and so on and so forth. So they perform absolutely vital and essential service as far as public health is concerned, but they are at highest risk of infection, and they have been poorly paid because COVID-19 carries a stigma. That stigma is also transferred onto them, and that's really not a desirable outcome at all. So despite the fact that they've lost their employment, there have been all of these adverse issues that we see. And finally, I come to the self-employed workers. Some of them are, of course, one-person enterprises, like somebody who sells tea outside on the street, or has a redi and sells vegetables or something. So they are self-employed. You can call them informal workers, whatever. So the classifications are a little bit blurred. But I was looking at the micro, small, and medium enterprises data, and I was just looking at registrations and comparing March to May 2019 registrations to March to May 2020 registrations. Just how many new micro, small, and medium enterprises registered on the government portal. Now, in most states of India, in March to May 2020, registrations went down, which is not surprising because of the economic lockdown. And so in the states that registrations went down, the percentage decline for women-owned enterprises was higher than that of male-owned enterprises. So it's not only women who were employed previously with other employers who lost jobs, but even women who were self-employed. Their economic activity suffers. So it's just a very basic indicator. And there are a few states where the registration actually went up. I don't know how that happened, but regardless, but the states where the registration of MSMEs went up, the percentage increase for women was smaller, right? So again, you see here a gendered impact of MSME registrations. Okay, so what is the lesson to be drawn? Was the overall picture that we are seeing, that the livelihood situation for women, which is already bad, has been made worse by the pandemic. And the choice seems to be really between either you do these risky jobs, which are female dominated more or less completely, or be unemployed, right? So that's a very, I'm not saying that's those are the only two choices, but a very large proportion of women are in between these two extremes. And that's not a happy situation to be in. So my concluding comments are that because India had very severe lockdown pretty early on, when the COVID spread was not actually as strong as it is today, the Indian economy has suffered more than most. So we suffered because of very heavy lockdown, and now we are suffering because of a high load of COVID cases, right? So it seems to be like the worst of both worlds. And if you see early estimates, again from the CMI data, which we don't have access to yet, but I'm just looking at their public data releases, you see that In May and June, there were some early shoots of recovery, but again, the data for July doesn't seem that all that promising. And there's a lot of the informal employment has returned to its earlier levels, but formal sector employment still continues to be lower than before. So just today I was reading the CMI update on their weekly employment situation, and it looks not very promising right now. Also, it's not surprising because COVID incidence is raging and public transportation is shut in most places. So even if factories were to open, how do workers get to the places? Plus, a lot of migrants have gone back, etc., etc. So there are all multiple reasons. So basically, employment recovery anytime soon doesn't seem likely. What will it do to gender gaps in labor force participation rates? Well, the thing is that historically, crises such as diseases, pandemics, world wars have led to shifts in labor force participation rates of a kind where the gender gaps in LFPRs have actually gone down. So for example, if you look at the evidence after the 1918 influenza pandemic in India, districts that had a greater incidence of influenza, female labor force participation actually went up because many families lost earning members of the family that were male. There was economic distress was again very high, and women, families had no choice but to allow women into the labor market. So what will happen to gender gaps? Something to examine later. The other reason why gender gaps in work participation might shift is because earlier women who had jobs, because women are also seen as primarily responsible for domestic work and childcare, often women employees would ask for work from home or flexible work arrangements. And that was one of the many reasons why women workers were stigmatized. Think, oh, so you're not committed to your job, you want to work from home, you want to take care of your family, so family comes first or work comes first. So women often have had to struggle with this, what is called work-life balance, and how do you balance the two? How do you make sure that you retain your job or you give full attention to your job while also discharging your domestic responsibilities? What has happened now during the lockdown everywhere, that work from home has become sort of normalized. Everybody has had to work from home, those who have jobs, of course. Now, will that mean that work from home will be the new normal for several industries or sectors, or if not the new normal for all times, but certainly it will not be as stigmatized as it used to be before. And to the extent that work from home was one of the reasons why women were stigmatized, will the destigmatization of work from home, or will the normalization of work from home shift gender norms, and that employees would be less averse to hiring women on account of the fear that women might ask for work from home? So that's again something to be seen later on, but that's another reason why we might see a lowering of gender gaps. Of course, as we saw earlier, at least in the first month, gender gaps increased. So that might happen as well. So this is all speculation. Now, what I want to sort of end by saying is that the pandemic, the lockdown, temporary halt, work from home, etc., these are all pause buttons because we don't want the disease to spread rapidly. We don't want people to contract the disease, in a spiraling proportion. So we hit the pause button. We say, okay, let's wait it out and, restart economic activity when we can. As we unpause, as we unlock, could we use this opportunity to rethink the way labor markets have been functioning, to re-examine whether labor markets are bearers of gender, whether there's been gender discrimination in the past, and is this now a good time, now that anyway we are trying to rework our situations in terms of domestic work, in terms of work outside the home, might this not be a good time for us to pause and reorient our policy framework and our thinking towards greater gender equality? As it is, we are going to change a lot of things. Why not bring the idea of gender equality also as an integral part of the way in which we think? But how can we even start doing that? First of all, we need to accept that a given policy might be gender blind, but the impact may not be gender neutral, right? And so we have to pay attention and recognize the gendered impacts of a given policy, for in this case, the lockdown. And in order to see where the gender gaps are the largest, what are the dimensions of the gender gap, we need gender disaggregated data in real time, not 5 years after everything has ended, because by then it'll be too late. So if, India has a huge pool of scientific talent, and so if various agencies, uh, private as well as government, were to release data and share the data that they have, this would be a good time for the scientific community. By scientific, I mean social sciences as well, to get together, analyze that data, and think of not restarting with business as usual or pre-pandemic normal, but reimagine a new normal, a new way of organizing the workplace, a new way of organizing domestic work at home, to make sure that gender equality becomes part and parcel of the way economic activity is organized. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was extremely insightful. Not just the content, but also the methodology that you used. I'm sure it'll be really helpful for all of us who are working on our thesis this year. We have a couple of questions. Shall I read them out and then you can take them one by one?
Yeah, sure. So I'm
Yeah,
just not looking at the chat. You tell me what they are.
sure. So we have one question by Professor Ayush Pant. He has three questions, sorry. The first one is, I'm missing a few summary statistics, proportion of rural urban, men, women in the sample. Two, would you be able to assess the impact of severity of lockdown with future waves of data? Maybe regression discontinuity on the borders of where the lockdown persisted and where it did not? And the third question is there any data on domestic violence?
Right. Thank you, Ayush. So in the paper, all of these summary stats are there. I just didn't want to make it very heavy with summary stats, but basically it's 63% rural, urban, and 37% rural, which is not the underlying population proportion. So CMI is more rural, more urban than the underlying population proportion. Male female is about 49 and 51, so it's pretty equal. What was the third summary stat? What was the third dimension along
Just
which?
both of them, rural, urban, and men, women.
So in the paper, which is, I can share the latest version, which is on the GLO working paper website. All the summary stats of all the variables used in the regression are there. So that's that. Yes, I hope to be able to use more data because I'm waiting for the next wave of data to come in. And then I can look at severity of lockdown by green, orange, and red zones, which are the government mandated zones, and hope to do some more, RDD or some more sophisticated analysis of this. What was the third question?
It was whether there's any data on domestic violence.
No, not in CMIE. No. But along with Kanika Mahajan at Ashoka, we are collecting data on domestic violence from other sources. So I've done few op-ed pieces based upon National Commission for Women data. I've written some, opinion pieces in the courts, which I can share. So what I've done is I've looked at the National Commission for Women data and looked at it last year versus this year and looked at nature of crime. And you see that in some of the women-related crimes, you do see a definite increase this year compared to the same period last year. And that's indicative. Of course, you have to remember that very few cases of domestic violence actually get reported. B, the National Commission for Women is not the first port of call. So domestic violence is underreported always, and NCW is an even greater underestimate. So Kanika and I are trying to collect data from other sources, not just NCW, which we have, and let's see how much data we are able to get. And so hopefully, in a couple of months, if we get even a few states, we will have something on domestic violence.
Thank you, Professor. There's two questions from Adit. The first question is, what could be the probable causes for the greater proportionate loss of jobs for women than men, especially since this departs from earlier trends? And the second question is, the ASHA Workers program works on monetary incentives for workers to complete certain periodic tasks. While the crisis has brought to the fore the fact that the income earned by most ASHAs is meager, even in states with the highest incentive, how would you propose to revamp the remuneration structure? Given that most ASHAs are demanding fixed salaries, how could this affect the relatively successful performance of incentive-based tasks?
No, so to answer the second question first, I think they absolutely deserve higher fixed salaries. You know how much their salaries are? They range as low as 2,500 rupees a month, even in rural areas. That's a pittance, or 3,000 rupees, right? And the monetary incentives, the more complicated you make the salary structure, the more likely it is that calculations will be wrong, there'll be disputes, etc. The public health expenditure in India is pitifully low as a proportion of our GDP. And if the COVID pandemic has brought anything to light, it is how woefully inadequate the public health infrastructure is. And the ASHAs have always been actually performing a stellar role in terms of the public health architecture, but they were invisible, just like the migrants were. And it's only now that many people say, oh, there are ASHA workers here, who do all this work. And so I absolutely don't think that by giving them a higher fixed pay, you can still have incentives built into the pay structure, but the base has to be higher. There is absolutely no doubt about it. So you have to signal what you value a lot, right? And do you value the work that ASHA workers do? Does the country need the work that ASHA workers do? And so the government pay structure has to signal that to a certain extent. Coming back, what are the reasons? Well, I mean, in absolute numbers, more women have not lost their jobs, right? So that's that. Relative to them being employed earlier, well, it could be this result. So when you ask me about previous trends, are you referring to what I'd shown in my earlier few slides? Because that was not data from India. I didn't say anything about earlier trends in India in terms of recession, because the 2008 recession was not so severe in India as it was in the West. So it's difficult to look at that data in terms of the effect of recession on female employment. That's harder to do. Anyway, the point is that it's retrenching women in general in terms of recession has always been easier than retrenching men, because often women are, in many families, women are the second earners, even if they are the primary earners. The belief is that you could retrench women and they will not really protest that much, as much as many trade unions tend to be male dominated or exclusively male. So trade unions also, to the extent that they have any role to play any longer in protecting jobs, they tend to protest against male retrenchment much more than female. Here it was just that enterprises just shut down, or even if they come back, as they have, some of them have come back. The fact is that in April, they just were not only were they not producing, they didn't know whether they'll be able to produce and when. And so that's really just the basic reason for job losses. And more men have lost jobs than women, that's for sure.
Professor, there's one more question from Pooja. She says, for the graph on hours spent on housework, it seems like for both the genders, the COVID period graphs are not exactly shifting, but just rising. does it mean that more people are answering the question because the number of people in the study remains the same since it's a panel data assumption?
No, it's how many hours, what proportion of women spent X hours versus Y, X 0.5, uh, 0.5 or 1 or 1.5, etc. So yeah, response rates are different. So this has not been adjusted for response rates. It's possible that more people answered this question in April than they did in December because often when the surveyor is contacting you, you're not really answering every question. But I also have averages, and the average time has also changed.
Okay. There's one more question from Karthik. It says the RBI has announced a plan to allow banks to restructure stressed loans. How would you compare the efficacy of this scheme compared to a wholesale debt standstill, where all debt payments are postponed for a year?
So I'm not a macroeconomist, so I don't know the exact, I won't be able to go into too much detail on this. But to me, both of these measures seem to be in the bucket of what are called supply side measures. So basically, when economic activity is at a standstill or is at a very low level, how do you get economic activity to restart? So one view is that you make liquidity available, you make funds available through loans and tell businesses, okay, why don't you just take a loan? We are giving it to you at a concessional rate and restart, start something new or expand or diversify or restart your business, right? A part of this could also include debt write-off completely or at least a moratorium on debt payments. So saying that, okay, if you had loans from before, we are not going to insist that you pay them now. So all of this is telling the businesses, okay, the pressure on you to repay loans or the pressure on you to look for sources of finance is being eased. You're being given money, or you're being told, okay, you don't have to pay back the money right now. So we are giving you these incentives, start producing now. And the idea is that once they start producing, they will employ people, people will buy, etc., etc. Right? So the idea is that you're restarting economic activity by making the supply constraints easier. Okay, but now think about it from the point of view, and that this is a big debate right now, by the way, within economists about whether the measures should be supply side or demand side. Now think about it from the other side, which is that in the pandemic situation with lockdown, with many workers either having gone back to their villages completely or are still coming back, but there is a great deal of uncertainty about A, labor availability, B, about future outbreaks of the disease itself, right? So we had a lockdown when the disease was not so severe. Now the case incidence is rising. Supposing tomorrow, again, the disease becomes out of control, and supposing either the whole country or parts of the country have to go back into lockdown. And some cities have done that. Bangalore was not so much on lockdown, but it went back. Guwahati reintroduced lockdown. So cities or states, Kerala, the lockdown has again come back, right? So because of the uncertain nature of the disease, the possibility of continuing economic activity unhindered is also very uncertain. Now, in that situation, what is going to prompt entrepreneurs or business people to restart business, to restart production? Is it the easing of the supply side constraint, or is the uncertainty about, okay, A, even if I restart my factory tomorrow, how do I know that I get enough workers to work in my factory? B, I already have unsold stock sitting. Why should I produce more when I don't know whether people have the income to buy? Okay, so it's a vicious cycle. You know that obviously if enough industrialists restarted their business, they will employ enough people and that will boost demand. And so that's the whole point about supply side measures, which is eventually, yes, if the cycle were to go through, it will boost demand. But because of the uncertainty, no individual businessman is going to want to try restarting economic activity with so much uncertainty. So what's the solution out of this? So one of the solutions that people are saying is that forget about loans or restructuring or write-offs or moratoria or liquidity, pumping liquidity into the system. How about the government either gave a minimum income, UBI, or NREGA jobs, or basically pump money into the economy so that people have uh, purchasing power. That's one way to go about it, which means that they can start buying goods and services, which will then boost production. That's one way. The other is supposing there are future lockdowns, right? Supposing there are, because of the uncertainty over the disease, there are going to be repeated lockdowns. What do workers do when, what should workers do when there are repeated lockdowns? If they have guarantee that their meals and shelter and basic health is going to be guaranteed in the city, they don't want to go back to the villages. Already many of them want to come back because there's no work in the villages. So if they have guarantee of being not starving to death in the city, then they will stay on, which means that if there's a 15-day lockdown and if it is lifted, they can immediately resume work. But if they go back to their villages, that possibility becomes removed. So either way, whether it is pumping money into the system to generate purchasing power, or whether it is to provide a safety net to workers to make them stay in the villages, to subsidize wage payments. So this result that we saw, people losing jobs, that need not happen. Factories can remain shut for a month and people may not lose their jobs because they are being given a subsidy from the government, right? So those are called demand side measures. So you are asking me to compare two supply side measures, and I'm not very qualified to do that. But to my mind, the larger question is between supply side measures and demand side measures, and what can get the Indian economy out of this economic slowdown or recession is going to be, I'm on the demand side of the debate rather than the supply side.
Professor, we have two last questions.
Yeah.
What do you think would be the gendered aftershocks of the pandemic, say in the informal sector? Would men be securing a larger chunk of the available employment post-recovery? Continuing from that, how could one reimagine gender-sensitive policy making for unregulated sectors where the large mass of workers are employed?
Yeah, very good questions. And I wish I had very simple and ready-made answers to give to this. I don't. So one is that in terms of recovery, the impact is, I mean, based on what I'm reading from the newspapers, it seems like the impact is still gendered. So even in terms of recovery, the probability of men regaining their jobs is higher than of women. So we'll have to look at the data and see how it all unfolds. And things are still unfolding. So, what we find in September, again in December, we might find something else. So we'll see how it goes. That's as far as that is concerned. Now, gender equality, gender policies working towards gender equality in the unregulated sector. Well, the unregulated sector needs to be regulated on a variety of fronts. Minimum wages, access to safety net measures, ration card. The unregulated sector is to a large extent serviced by migrant workers. And what we discovered this time, when we literally saw, when the migrants became literally visible, is that they fall through the cracks of the safety net system. Why? Because their ration cards, their voter IDs are in one state, they're working in another state, and often they lose out. So one of the things that can happen is, uniform ration cards, or just, on demand, everybody should be entitled to ration or PDS, access to healthcare, etc. Now, all of these things have to be put in place in the informal sector. And when all of this is being done, that's a good time to also think of the gendered impact. So for example, one of the huge issues is, what do women who work in the informal economy, what happens to their children? So on the construction sites, we've seen children just, playing around in the sand because their mothers are working as construction workers, and there's literally no place for them to go. Women don't have access to shelter. Women don't have access to toilets. Many of these, dhabas and all these roadside places where workers rest are very male spaces. There is no space for women to enter, to engage with us. So we need to have more women-friendly spaces. Just even some very simple thing like toilets, which women can use when they're working. We can have centralized markets where women producing, artisanal goods or vegetables or anything can be brought together. We can have cooperatives that work in food processing, that work in small manufactured goods. We can have non-farm employment in rural areas that is exclusively focused on women whose husbands are away as migrant workers. So there can be a whole range of initiatives that can be taken at this stage, actually, to increase livelihood possibilities for women.
I think there's no more questions for now. So thank you so much, Professor, and thank you everyone for attending our talk today. We'll be having a few more talks in the next few weeks, so do attend those as well. I think that's it for today. But yeah, thank you so much, Professor, for the talk today and answering all of the questions.
Thank you all for inviting me.
Yeah.
Bye.